Thank you very much for the invitation to speak to you here in the north and east of Syria on this very historic moment where we celebrate 10 years of withdrawal of the Syrian Arab army from the Kurdish territories that led the basis for the self-administration we have now in this region. As a political scientist, please excuse me that I might paint a little bit a more nuanced picture than some politicians would do, but I think it's important to see and to watch a bit closer what happened here if you want to analyze the role of this region in the regional and global political scale. So we have to look a bit closer also to the events that happened 10 years ago. What kind of revolution was that? I think it's very crucial that we didn't had any militarization of the revolution here at the beginning. The Syrian Arab army withdrew from the region without fighting and without destroying the cities. And this is already a huge diplomatic success of the Kurdish politicians who later on established the self-administration here, and it shows already the diplomatic abilities that some of the political actors here had from the beginning on, because you managed to liberate these three Kurdish territories, the Jazeera, Kobani and Afrin, without destroying the cities and without bloodshed. This is already a huge success that should be celebrated today as well. And at this moment I want to mention also that the military structures that were established here, especially the YPG and the YPG, later on also the Syrian Democratic Forces, were from the beginning on defensive forces. They defended the Kurdish inhabited territories here against aggression from outside, and they never attacked a neighboring country. The only shots that were fired towards your northern neighbor in Turkey were fired after Turkey attacked the region in a defense against the Turkish aggression in October 2019. So, the self-administration here, that what became later on the self-administration, was from the beginning on a defensive and a political project and not predominantly a military project. But of course, in a situation of a war, you need a military to defend yourself against aggression from outside. And I will come back to that soon. But I want to focus on the diplomatic abilities of these structures that were started to be established 10 years ago. I did a lot of research here in the last 10 years, and I also traveled to Afrin in 2015. And what really impressed me is that this relatively weak region compared to the strong neighbors was able several times to mediate between much more stronger military forces in the region than they were themselves. Especially in Afrin, when I traveled there, there was the situation where Islamist militias controlled most of the surrounding territories of Afrin, and there was a little regime enclave inhabited by Arab Shiite people, Nubal and Sahra. And when there was a real problem between the Islamist militias and the Nubla and Sahra, sometimes the Kurds from Afrin mediated between the Islamist opposition and the regime. Also in Aleppo, a small Kurdish entity, a small Kurdish district, Sheikh Mahsud, could have never survived until today if they would have been able to exist in a divided city between what started as Jaish al-Khur and later became the Islamic Front and a bunch of Islamist militias, and the Syrian regime army. And it needed a lot of diplomatic abilities, actually, to keep this very precarious autonomy of the Kurdish district in Aleppo. However, all diplomatic abilities are not enough if you face an enemy that doesn't care at all about any diplomatic solutions and about any political solutions. So when in 2014 ISIS attacked this region, the only possibility was to defend the region. But even then, the self-administration here showed that they were able to find ways to get international support. International support by civil society institutions, by internationalists, they were already mentioned by the speaker before me, but even more important, at least from a military perspective, was the support they gained by the coalition forces that helped to defend Kobani in literally the last moment. And since then, the self-administration became something like an international player in international relations without being a state. So it's a kind of in-between situation that you are actually in many ways treated already like a state-like institution, but on the same time you even don't want to be a nation state, you want to stay as a part of Syria, and you're still suffering under isolation by most of your neighbors, and you need to deal with them in a very diplomatic way, actually, to even keep the border open, which sometimes works better and sometimes doesn't work that well. However, the sheer number of international visitors, including high-ranking visitors, members of national parliaments, of the European Parliament, and different delegations who negotiated with the self-administration about returning their citizens that fought in the ranks of ISIS, shows that the self-administration is taken serious on an international level. Why is that the case? First of all, because it survived for 10 years and it became an important political and military actor in the region. But I think there is a second reason for that, and this is the character of the political structures and the political ideas that were established here. As a political scientist, I'm not painting a rosy picture here. I don't want to say this is now the perfect democracy, and as we know, there are a lot of problems with the infrastructure and so on. But if there is one thing that can be said about the political system here, it is that it's an inclusive political system. And it's especially inclusive towards the ethnic and religious minorities in the region. It's even more inclusive, I would say, concerning different Aramaic and Armenian-speaking Christians and the Arabs in this region, and also the smaller minorities like Circassian, Chechens, Turkmens, then it is inclusive concerning other rival Kurdish opposition parties that are connected with the KLG, for example. But I was really surprised when after the liberation of Raqqa and huge territories with predominantly Arab society, with Arab people, when the self-administration managed to include these territories in an extremely pragmatic way into their political structures. Because many of these territories are inhabited by very conservative tribal societies that in many ways go not in line with the ideology of the political party that established this self-administration. So to talk about women's rights and women liberation, for example, in some tribal rural societies in the newly liberated territories seemed to me a huge challenge. And I was really curious, how will they deal with these territories that were just taken over from ISIS, and where a lot of people, not all of them of course, but a lot of people also supported these ideas. And the pragmatic stand of the self-administration, that included also these conservative shuyukh and the tribal structures into the self-administration, showed to me that actually this willingness to find practical solutions and to include different parts of the Syrian society into this new political system was seen as much more important than some ideological questions that might be discussed also later. And I think this pragmatic way of dealing with the huge and enormous challenges here, and especially the inclusive way of dealing with it, at least lays a nucleus for a democratic development in the future. And this is something that is seen. It is seen also in Europe, it is seen in the international community. And especially if you compare this inclusiveness to the other projects that exist in Syria at the moment, you have to say it's the only inclusive project that in reality exists. Because what are the other projects? The other one are both exclusivists and not inclusivists. It's the Arab nationalist exclusiveness of the Syrian regime, and it's the Sunni Islamist exclusiveness of the pro-Turkish militias, and even worse, the jihadi groups, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and ISIS. So I think these are really the main reasons why this region and its administration was and is taken serious on an international level by both states and governments and civil societies. However, the title here is also challenges. So I think one of the biggest challenges at the moment is actually that, thanks to the time the Syrian war already lasts, the danger is that the whole situation here is just forgotten in the international media and also in international politics. At the moment, we are in Europe at the situation where very rarely a newspaper writes an article about Syria in general or Rojava in particular. you hardly see any reporting on television about this region, because since the war in Ukraine started, all the attention of the public debates are directed towards Ukraine, but the war in the Ukraine didn't make it easier for you. It's the other way around. You have here on the ground the two major rivals of the war in Ukraine that are both present in the territory of the self-administration in North and East Syria. Russia in the western part of the territory, and the United States and a little bit also France in the eastern part of it. So to find solutions is even getting more difficult. However, if you want to and you need to secure this territory against the present threats of Turkey, you need to deal also with these two superpowers that are present in the region, because at the end of the day, you can make, the Syrian Democratic Forces can make it very costly for Turkey to invade, but at the end of the day, a fully equipped NATO army will not be stopped by a well-trained but not very well-equipped militia like the SDF fighters. Turkey actually can only be stopped politically with pressure of especially the states that are present here, with pressure of the United States in the east of the territory and Russia in the west of the territory. And again, this means that you will need a lot of diplomatic efforts, that you need to talk with both of them to stop Turkey invading this territory. I, knowing your abilities in the last years, have still the hope that you will be able to do that, and I still have the hope that you get the support also from at least a part of the international community in that. But let us not forget that sometimes these efforts also failed. And in 2018, as we all know, Turkey invaded Afrin, and it got the green light from Russia to do that. And in 2019, Turkey invaded Serikaniye and Tal Abyad, and it got the green light from the United States to do that. Alhamdulillah, we have a different president in Washington now, so maybe history is not repeated, but we are at a very crucial moment in the history of this region, and it would not be only a disaster for the population of North and East Syria, but for the whole region, if the territory controlled by the self-administration of North and East Syria would be overrun by Turkey. Because we know very well that there are hundreds of sleeper cells of ISIS still present in the region. And after the attempt to liberate the ISIS prisoners in Hasaka in January, we know very well that this is one of the groups that would very much profit from a Turkish invasion, and there could be an attack from the north by Turkey and from the south actually from the jihadis of ISIS. All this is at the moment a speculation, and I think one of the reasons why people like me and other people from European countries are here in the region is also to show you, but also to show to the people back home that this region should not be forgotten, and that all kinds of exchange, of political exchange, of economic exchange, of scientific exchange is necessary, and you need our support for the future and the next 10 years, but we need also your support in the struggle against terrorist jihadi groups like ISIS. All of that is not over, and I'm sure there will be times where the spotlight of political structures, but also of the public opinion in Europe, will be again directed towards Syria, and I hope it's not when the next human tragedy happens, but when from this region some positive developments can be reported that influence also the situation in other parts of Syria. Thank you very much.